The attack on Centauri 7 began at dawn on the third day, just as intelligence had predicted. Zephyra had spent those 3 days learning everything she could about combat medicine from the human field medics. They taught her how to treat wounds while under fire, how to prioritize patients when resources were limited, and how to keep working even when explosions were going off around her. But nothing could have prepared her for the scale of this battle. The Void Swarm came not in thousands, but in millions. Their ships blocked out the sun as they descended toward the planet's surface. The mechanical creatures that emerged were bigger and more advanced than anything Zephyra had seen before. "This is different," Jake said as they watched the enemy forces deploy. "They have learned from our previous battles. They are adapting." The evacuation of Centauri 7 was more complex than New Haven Colony. The planet had 7 major cities spread across 3 continents. Each city needed its own evacuation site and defensive perimeter. The 3,000 human soldiers were spread thin, with small units assigned to protect each location. Jake's company was assigned to defend the capital city of New Prague, where 2 million civilians were waiting for transport. Zephyra set up her medical station in a reinforced building near the spaceport, close enough to treat wounded soldiers, but protected enough to keep her equipment safe. The first wave of Void Swarm machines hit their defensive line at 0800 hours. Zephyra immediately understood why this battle would be different. The machines moved faster and worked together better than before. They seemed to have learned human tactics and developed countermeasures. Within the first hour, she had treated 12 wounded soldiers. The injuries were more severe than she had seen before. The Void Swarm's new weapons caused burns that were harder to heal and cuts that went deeper than normal. "They are targeting our medics," reported Sergeant Park over the radio. "3 field hospitals on other continents have been destroyed in the first hour." Zephyra felt a chill run through her. The Void Swarm had learned that humans fought harder when they knew their wounded would be cared for. By targeting medical facilities, they were trying to break human morale. "We need to move the medical station," Jake said, appearing at her side, with a bleeding arm. "They will target this building soon. I am not abandoning wounded soldiers," Zephyra said firmly, even as she healed the cut on his arm. "I am not asking you to abandon them. I am asking you to stay alive so you can help more of them." Before Zephyra could respond, the building shook from a massive explosion. Through the window, she could see Void Swarm machines advancing toward their position. The human defensive line was being pushed back faster than expected. "How long until the evacuation is complete?" she asked. 16 hours, Jake replied. "Maybe 18 if we include the outlying settlements." Zephyra looked at the advancing enemy forces and did some quick calculations. At the current rate of advance, the defensive line would collapse in 6 hours. There was no way they could hold for 18 hours against this many enemies, but the humans kept fighting anyway. They fell back from position to position, setting up new defensive lines wherever they could. They used every building, every barrier, every piece of cover to slow down the Void Swarm advance. As the day wore on, Zephyra began to notice something strange. Other species were starting to help with the defense. Korthak civilians who had already been evacuated were returning with weapons. Valerian engineers were helping to build stronger barriers. Even some of the more peaceful species were, contributing by carrying ammunition or helping to move wounded soldiers. "Why are they coming back?" she asked Jake during a brief lull in the fighting. "They were already safe on the evacuation ships." "Because they have been watching us fight for them for months," Jake replied. "Maybe they decided it was time to fight with us instead of just watching us die for them." This was something Zephyra had not expected. Throughout the war, humans had fought alone while other species focused on evacuation and logistics. But now, for the first time, aliens were choosing to stay and fight alongside the humans. It was not coordinated or organized. There was no formal alliance or battle plan. It was simply individuals from different species deciding that they could not stand by and watch humans sacrifice themselves anymore. A group of young Zephyrian males appeared at their defensive position, carrying weapons they barely knew how to use. "We want to help," their leader said to Jake. "Show us where to fight." Jake looked surprised but quickly began organizing them into defensive positions. "Stay low, fire in short bursts, and do not try to be heroes," he told them. "Just help us. Slow them down." Similar scenes were playing out across the battlefield. Aliens who had never fought before were picking up weapons and standing alongside human soldiers. They were not trained warriors, and many of them would probably die, but they were choosing to fight anyway. Zephyra realized she was witnessing something historic. For the first time since the war began, humans were not fighting alone. Other species were finally understanding what humans had been trying to show them, that some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant risking everything. But the Void Swarm seemed to understand this too. Their attacks became more focused and more brutal. They targeted the mixed groups of humans and aliens with special intensity, as if they knew that this cooperation was dangerous to their goals. By mid-afternoon, the situation was desperate. The defensive line had been pushed back to within a kilometer of the spaceport. Evacuation ships were still loading refugees, but they needed at least 6 more hours to get everyone off the planet. "We cannot hold for 6 more hours," Sergeant Park reported to Jake. "We have lost 40% of our forces, and ammunition is running low." Jake looked out at the advancing Void Swarm machines, then at the evacuation ships still loading civilians. Zephyra could see him making calculations in his head, weighing impossible choices. "We will hold," he said finally. "We will find a way." "How?" Park asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he activated his radio and spoke to all human forces on the planet. "All units, this is Captain Martinez. We are implementing Protocol 7. I repeat, Protocol 7 is now in effect." Zephyra did not know what Protocol 7 was, but she could see the effect it had on the human soldiers. Their faces went grim and determined. Some of them began saying goodbye to each other. "What is Protocol 7? She asked Jake. Jake looked at her with sad eyes. "It means we stop retreating and start charging. We cannot hold them back anymore, so we go forward and hit them as hard as we can for as long as we can." "That is suicide." "Yes," Jake agreed. "But it will buy the evacuation ships the time they need." As Zephyra watched the human soldiers prepare for their final charge, she realized that this was what made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. When faced with impossible choices, they did not look for ways to save themselves. They looked for ways to save others, even if it meant certain death. It was the most beautiful and most heartbreaking thing she had ever seen. The battle for New Haven Colony lasted 18 hours. Zephyra had never experienced anything like it. The sounds, the smells, the constant fear that the next explosion might kill her or someone she was trying to help. But she also experienced something else she had not expected: purpose. During those 18 hours, she treated 43 wounded soldiers. Some had injuries so severe that any other species would have given up and waited to die. But the humans kept fighting. Even with broken bones and terrible burns, they would accept her healing treatment and immediately ask to return to their positions. "I can keep fighting," a soldier named Bobby told her after she had healed a deep cut across his chest. "My squad needs me." You need rest, Zephyra argued. Your body has been through trauma. People are still evacuating, Bobby said, already, reaching for his weapon. I can rest when they are all safe. This happened over and over again. Humans who should have been lying down and recovering instead insisted on returning to battle. Not because they enjoyed fighting, but because they could not bear the thought of civilians being hurt while they were safe. Jake stayed close to her throughout the battle, just as he had promised. Whenever the fighting got too intense, he would create a protective barrier around her treatment area using destroyed vehicles or debris. He never left her side for more than a few minutes. You are supposed to be commanding your squad, Zephyra said during a brief, quiet moment. My squad can handle themselves, Jake replied. My job right now is keeping you alive so you can keep others alive. I am not your responsibility. Yes, you are, Jake said simply. You came here because of me. That makes you my responsibility. Zephyra realized this was another example of human thinking that confused other species. Jake was willing to risk his mission and his men to protect one medic. To most military minds, this would seem wrong. The mission should come first. But Jake saw protecting her as part of the mission, because she was helping to save lives. The evacuation ships continued to load refugees, Zephyra began to notice something interesting. The other species being evacuated kept looking at the human soldiers with expressions she had never seen before. It was not just gratitude. It was something closer to wonder. A group of Korthak elders approached her treatment station during a break in the fighting. Korthak were normally proud warriors who rarely showed emotion, but these elders had tears in their eyes. Healer, one of them said to Zephyra, we must ask you something. Why do these humans fight so hard for us? We have been enemies with their people before. We have nothing to offer them in return. Zephyra looked over at Jake, who was helping to carry wounded soldiers to her station. Because they believe you deserve to live, she said. They believe all conscious life has value. But they are dying for us, another elder said. Many of their young warriors have fallen today. This is not a fair trade. They do not think about fairness, Zephyra explained. They think about what is right. The elders were quiet for a moment. Then the first one spoke again. Our people will remember this. We will tell our children and our children's children about the humans who died so we could live. This conversation was repeated throughout the day with different species. Zephyrian families, Valerian civilians, even some of the more peaceful insectoid races all asked similar questions. They could not understand why humans would sacrifice, so much for strangers. But Zephyra was beginning to understand something else. The humans were not just saving lives in this battle. They were changing how other species thought about sacrifice and protection. Every alien who was rescued by human, soldiers would remember it. They would tell others. They would pass the story down to their children. Humans were not just fighting the void swarm. They were spreading an idea across the galaxy that protecting others was worth any cost. As the last evacuation ship lifted off from New Haven Colony, the human defensive line finally began to fall back. They had held their positions for 18 hours against impossible odds, and now there was nothing left to protect. It was time to escape before the void swarm overran their positions completely, but even the retreat was organized around saving lives. The most wounded soldiers were evacuated first, then the medics and support staff, then the regular infantry. Jake and the other officers were the last ones to board the transport ships. Did we get everyone? Jake asked as their ship lifted off. 2.1 million civilians evacuated successfully, reported Sergeant Lisa Park, Jake's second-in-command. 17 human casualties, but everyone is alive. Zephyra was amazed. In 18 hours of intense combat, not a single human soldier had been killed. Some were badly wounded, but all of them would recover. It was almost impossible to believe. How? She asked Jake. I have read reports from other battles where humans suffered much higher casualties. We had better medical support this time, Jake said, looking directly at her. Having a healer who could treat wounds immediately made all the difference. Soldiers who would have died from blood loss or infection were back on their feet in minutes. Zephyra felt a warm glow of pride. She had made a difference. Her presence had helped save human lives, which in turn had helped save civilian lives. But as their transport ship flew toward the next battle zone, she realized something that made her both happy and sad. This was her life now. She would travel from battle to battle, treating wounded soldiers and helping them continue their impossible mission of protecting others. She would probably never see her home world again. She would never work in a safe, quiet hospital. She would live with the constant threat of death and the weight of carrying other people's pain, and she was completely at peace with that choice. Where are we going next? She asked Jake. Centauri 7, he replied. Intelligence reports say the Void Swarm will attack there in 3 days. There are 5 million civilians who need to be evacuated. And how many human soldiers will be assigned to protect them? 3,000. The numbers were insane. 3,000 humans against the entire Void Swarm, protecting 5 million civilians. It should have been impossible. But Zephyra had seen what humans could accomplish when they were fighting for others. We will need more medical supplies, she said, already thinking about the logistics of treating wounded soldiers in another impossible battle. Jake smiled at her. It was the first time she had seen him look truly happy since she had met him. Welcome to the war, Zephyra, he said. I am glad you are here. As their ship flew through space toward the next battle, Zephyra looked out at the stars and thought about the choice she had made. She was no longer just a healer. She was part of something bigger now. She was part of the human mission to protect all conscious life in the galaxy. It was the most frightening and most wonderful thing she had ever done. 3 days before Jake was scheduled to leave, Zephyra submitted her application to join the Frontline Medical Corps. The decision had been easy to make, but hard to explain to her superiors. Dr. Caney, the head of medical services, called her into his office immediately. He was an older Valerian with silver skin and concerned eyes. "This is very unusual, Nurse Zephyra," he said, looking at her application. "You are requesting assignment to the most dangerous medical posting in the galaxy. Our casualty rates for frontline medics are nearly as high as combat soldiers." "I understand the risks," Zephyra replied. "Do you?" "The last 3 medical teams we sent to support human forces were completely wiped out. We are not talking about treating patients in a safe hospital. You would be working in active combat zones with no guarantee of evacuation if things go wrong." "I know." Dr. Caney studied her for a long moment. "This is about the human patient, is it not, Captain Martinez?" Zephyra felt her cheeks warm, but she nodded. "Partly, yes. But it is about more than that." "Explain." Zephyra had spent hours thinking about how to put her feelings into words. "I have been studying human military tactics and philosophy. They fight differently than any other species in the galaxy. They prioritize saving lives over winning battles. They protect civilians even when it means certain death. And they do it because they believe every conscious life has value. This is not news to us. Human tactical doctrine is well documented. But we are not learning from it, Zephyra said passionately. We treat human sacrifice as a curiosity, something to study and analyze. But what if they are right? What if the way they fight is not just brave, but necessary? Dr. Caney leaned back in his chair. You think we should all fight like humans? Throw away our lives for strangers? I think we should ask ourselves why humans are willing to die for us when we are not willing to risk anything for them, Zephyra said. They have the highest casualty rates, the most dangerous assignments, and the hardest jobs. And they volunteer for all of it. Meanwhile, we stay safe and let them carry the burden. We provide medical support, intelligence, logistics from a safe distance, Zephyra interrupted. When was the last time a Valerian medic died treating human soldiers? When was the last time any of our people were killed protecting human civilians? Dr. Caney was quiet for a moment. The humans have never asked for such support, because they do not expect it. They are used to fighting alone, dying alone, carrying impossible burdens alone. But what if they did not have to? Zephyra stood up and moved to the window. Outside, she could see human medical transports arriving with more wounded from the front lines. Captain Martinez has scars from a dozen different battles, she continued. Every one of those scars came from protecting non-human civilians. He has given blood to save Korthak warriors, donated organs to help Zephyrian children, and nearly died protecting Valerian families he had never met. And he is not unusual. This is what humans do. And you want to do the same? I want to try, Zephyra said simply. I want to see what happens when someone fights alongside humans instead of just watching them fight for us. Dr. Caney was quiet for a long time. Finally, he sighed and signed her transfer papers. You realize this may be a one-way assignment? He said. I understand. And you are certain this is what you want? Yes. 2 days later, Zephyra stood in the shuttle bay with Jake and a dozen other human soldiers who were returning to active duty. She carried a medical kit designed for battlefield conditions and wore armor that felt strange and heavy. Jake had argued with her decision for hours, trying to convince her to stay safe on the medical station, but she had refused to change her mind. Eventually, he had stopped arguing and started teaching her about combat medicine and battlefield survival. Stay close to me, he said as they boarded the shuttle. Do not try to treat wounded soldiers in the middle of a firefight. Wait for cover or a lull in the fighting, and if I tell you to run, you run immediately. Do not argue. I will be careful, Zephyra promised. The shuttle flight to the front lines took 6 hours. During the trip, Zephyra learned more about the soldiers she would be working with. They were all volunteers, all veterans of multiple battles, and all completely committed to their mission of protecting civilian evacuation routes. None of them questioned her presence or suggested she should go home where it was safe. They simply accepted that she wanted to help and began teaching her everything they could about staying alive in combat. When they arrived at Forward Base Echo, Zephyra got her first real look at the war. The base was built into an asteroid field, near a star system that was under attack by the Void Swarm. Ships were constantly coming and going, carrying wounded soldiers and refugees to safety. The medical facilities were basic but efficient. There were no private rooms or comfortable beds, just rows of cots where injured soldiers were treated quickly before being sent back to fight or evacuated to better hospitals. Zephyra was assigned to a medical team that supported the 15th Human Defense Corps. Her job was to provide emergency treatment for wounded soldiers during active combat operations. Her first mission came the next day. Intelligence reports showed that the Void Swarm was attacking a colony world with 2 million civilians. The 15th was being sent to establish defensive lines around the spaceports, while evacuation ships loaded refugees as their transport ship approached the planet. Zafira could see the battle already beginning. Void swarm machines were landing on the surface like metal rain, and human defensive positions were firing everything they had to slow the advance. "Remember what I taught you," Jake said as they prepared to deploy. "Stay alive so you can help. Others stay alive." "I will," Zafira promised. The transport landed in a battlefield that was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Explosions shook the ground constantly, laser fire lit up the sky, and the screams of wounded soldiers mixed with the mechanical sounds of Void Swarm machines. But through it all, she saw something that made her understand why she had come. Human soldiers were not just fighting to kill enemies or hold territory. They were fighting to create safe corridors for civilians to reach the evacuation ships. Every position they held, every sacrifice they made, was designed to save lives. And now, for the first time, Zafira was part of that mission. When a soldier fell wounded, she was there to help. When someone needed blood or medicine or just a gentle touch from a healer, she could provide it. She was no longer just watching humans sacrifice themselves for others. She was helping to keep them alive so they could continue their impossible, beautiful, necessary work. As she knelt beside a wounded soldier and used her healing abilities to ease his pain, Zafira felt something she had never experienced before. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. She was fighting for someone too, for Jake, for the wounded soldiers around her, for the civilians being evacuated, and for the simple idea that all conscious life deserved protection. It was terrifying and wonderful, and completely right. And as the battle raged around them, Zafira finally understood what it meant to be human. It was not about being born on Earth or having human DNA. It was about choosing to protect others, even when the cost was everything you had. She was still a Valerian healer with crystalline blue skin and empathic abilities. But in her heart, where it mattered most, she had become something new. She had become someone who fought for others, just like the humans had taught her, just like Jake had shown her was possible. Jake had been in the medical bay for 6 weeks now. His wounds were almost completely healed, and he could walk and exercise normally. Zafira knew he would be cleared for duty soon, which meant he would return to the war. The thought made something hurt deep inside her chest. She had grown to care about this strange, selfless human more than she wanted to admit. Every day she found excuses to spend time in his room. They talked about everything: his childhood on Earth, her training as a healer, the different species they had both met, the beauty of distant stars, but they always came back to the war. Jake could not seem to think about anything else for long. He would be in the middle of telling a funny story about his training days, and then his face would go serious. He would mention a friend who had died, or a battle he should have been fighting in, or civilians who might be in danger while he was safe in the medical bay. Zafira had started reading reports from the front lines every day. The war was not going well. The Void Swarm had taken 3 more star systems in the past month. Millions of people were fleeing toward the core worlds, and there were not enough ships or soldiers to protect them all. She also read the casualty reports. Every day, more human names were added to the lists of the dead and missing. Jake would sometimes recognize names when she mentioned them, and his face would go still and quiet for hours afterward. "You are thinking about going back," Zafira said one morning while checking his vital signs. "I am cleared for light duty." Jake said. Dr. Hamilton says I can return to active service next week. Your body is healed, Zephyra agreed. But bodies are not the only things that need healing. Jake looked at her with curiosity. What do you mean? I can feel emotions through my touch, Zephyra explained. It is part of my healing abilities. Every time I touch you, I feel the weight you carry. You blame yourself for every person you could not save, even though you have saved hundreds. I could have saved more. You could have died trying. Then you would have saved no one. Jake was quiet for a moment. Sometimes I think that would be easier. The words hit Zephyra like a physical blow. She sat down heavily in the chair beside his bed. You want to die? I want the dying to stop, Jake said quietly. I want to live in a universe where good people do not have to sacrifice themselves to protect others. But that is not the universe we have. So yes, sometimes I think it would be easier to just stop fighting and let someone else carry the wait for a while. But you will not stop. No, I cannot. Zephyra realized she was crying. Tears were running down her crystalline cheeks, which surprised her because Valerians rarely cried. But looking at this man who carried so much pain and responsibility, she could not help herself. I want to do something for you before you leave, she said. A healing treatment that goes deeper than just fixing wounds. That afternoon, Zephyra prepared her most advanced healing equipment. She dimmed the lights in Jake's room and set up crystals that would amplify her empathic abilities. This was a treatment she had never performed on a human before, but she had to try. Lie down and relax, she told Jake. This will let me sense your injuries more completely, including ones that are not physical. Jake lay back on the bed and closed his eyes. Zephyra placed her hands on his chest and let her consciousness reach out to touch his. Immediately, she was overwhelmed by the intensity of what she felt. There was pain, so much pain, but not the kind that came from wounds. This was the pain of loss, of responsibility, of caring too much about too many people. She felt every person Jake had failed to save like a weight on his soul. She felt his desperate need to protect others, even at the cost of his own life. But she also felt something else. Love. Not romantic love, but something bigger and more universal. Jake loved every living being in the galaxy, even ones he had never met. He loved them enough to die for them, enough to carry their suffering as his own. You fought for someone, she whispered, her hands still touching his chest. She could feel the story behind every scar, every wound, every moment of pain. All of it had been to protect others. Jake opened his eyes and looked at her. For you, he said quietly. At first, Zephyra did not understand. She had not been at any of those battles. She had not been among the civilians he had protected. But as their eyes met, she realized what he meant. He had not fought for her specifically. He had fought for the idea of her, for every being in the universe who deserved to live and be happy and be free from fear. He had fought for people he would never meet, including her. I was not there, she said. Yes, you were, Jake replied. Every time I saw a family running from the void swarm, I thought about families like yours. Every time I protected a child, I thought about all the children in the universe who deserve to grow up safe. Every time I held a defensive line, I was thinking about nurses like you who should be able to heal people instead of treating war wounds. Zephyra felt something break open inside her chest. Through their empathic connection, she could feel the truth of his words. Jake had not just been fighting for abstract principles or distant strangers. He had been fighting for the idea that beings like her should be able to live peaceful, happy lives. "But you do not even know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Jake said. "I know you are kind and gentle, and you heal people because you care about them. I know you work hard to help others feel better. I know you have never hurt anyone if you could avoid it. That is enough. That is worth fighting for. Worth dying for." Yes. Zephyra removed her hands from his chest, but she could still feel the echo of his emotions. This human had been willing to sacrifice everything for the simple idea that good people like her deserved to be protected. It was the most beautiful and most heartbreaking thing she had ever experienced. "Your people are going to destroy themselves," she said, wiping tears from her face. "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But we will save as many others as we can first." "That is not fair. You should not have to carry that burden alone." "We do not have to," Jake said with a small smile. "We choose to. And we are not alone. We have each other. And we have the knowledge that every life we save gets to continue living and maybe make the universe a little better." As Zephyra looked at this wounded soldier who was about to return to an almost certain death, she made a decision that surprised even her. She was not going to let humans carry this burden alone anymore. If they were willing to die for strangers, then maybe it was time for strangers to start fighting alongside them. "Jake," she said quietly, "what if you did not have to go back alone?" "What do you mean?" "What if someone went with you? Someone who could help heal the wounded and maybe help carry some of that weight you feel?" Jake stared at her in shock. "Zephyra, no. It is too dangerous. You are a healer, not a soldier. Someone has to take care of the people who take care of everyone else," she said simply. And for the first time since she had met him, Jake Martinez looked like he might cry. Zephyra spent her free time in the station's information center, digging deeper into human military records. What she found changed everything she thought she knew about warfare and sacrifice. The 15th Human Defense Corps, Jake's unit, had a special mission. While other human forces fought the Void Swarm directly, the 15th was assigned to protect evacuation routes. Their job was not to win battles or destroy enemies. Their job was to die slowly while others escaped. The records showed mission after mission, where the 15th had been sent to hold impossible positions. They would arrive at a planet just as the Void Swarm attacked, set up defensive lines around evacuation sites, and fight until every civilian ship got away safely. Then, if any, humans were still alive, they would try to escape too. But escape was rarely possible. The 15th Human Defense Corps had the highest casualty rate of any military unit in galactic history. In 3 years of fighting, they had been completely wiped out and rebuilt 7 times. Jake was one of only 12 original members still alive. Zephyra pulled up classified battle footage from Kepler 442b. She had to get special permission to view it, claiming it was for medical research into human psychology. The truth was, she had to see for herself what Jake and his people had done. The footage was taken from evacuation ships as they lifted off from the planet. Below, she could see the human defensive lines stretched thin across a vast valley. There were maybe 2,000 human soldiers facing off against hundreds of thousands of Void Swarm machines. The machines looked like giant metal spiders with cutting lasers and explosive launchers. They moved fast and seemed impossible to kill. But the humans held their ground, firing everything they had while the evacuation ships slowly filled with refugees. Zephyra watched as the human line was pushed back, step by step. She saw soldiers fall and others move to fill the gaps. She saw humans throw themselves at machines 10 times their size just to slow them down for a few seconds. And through it all, the evacuation ships kept loading and taking off. The most shocking part was the mix of species being evacuated. There were Valerians like herself, proud Korthak warriors, Zephyrian families, and dozens of other races. Many of these species had been enemies of humanity just a few years ago. Some still were, technically, but the humans protected them all equally. In one part of the footage, Zephyrah saw Jake himself. He was leading a squad that was holding a bridge while Valerian civilians crossed to safety. A group of Void swarm machines broke through the line and headed straight for the refugees. Jake and 5 other humans ran directly at the machines, firing weapons and throwing grenades with no regard for their own safety. The machines killed 4 of the humans instantly. Jake and 1 other soldier managed to destroy 3 machines before more arrived. The last soldier fell just as Jake grabbed a damaged machine and used it as a shield while firing at the others. He was badly wounded but kept fighting until every Valerian had crossed the bridge safely. Then he collapsed and did not get up again. Zephyrah had to stop the footage and take a break. Her hands were shaking. She had known Jake was brave, but seeing him in action was different. He had fought like someone who did not care if he lived or died, as long as others survived. She went back to his room and found him doing exercises to rebuild his strength. He was moving carefully, but she could see he was getting better every day. "I watched the footage from Kepler 442b, she said. Jake stopped exercising and looked at her. "You did not need to do that." "Yes, I did," Zephyrah said. "I needed to understand. I saw you on the bridge. You saved 200 Valerian civilians." "My job," Jake said simply. Those Valerians had never seen a human before that day. Some of them probably thought humans were primitive barbarians, but you died protecting them anyway. "I did not die," Jake pointed out. "I am here talking to you." "You were willing to die," Zephyrah corrected. "That is the same thing." Jake sat down on his bed and looked at his hands. "Every species in the galaxy has something they are good at. Valerians are healers. Korthak are builders. Zephyrians are explorers. Humans are protectors. It is what we do. But protecting people should not mean dying for them." "Sometimes it does," Jake said quietly. "The Void Swarm does not negotiate or show mercy. The only way to stop them is to fight them. And fighting them means people die. Better it should be us than civilians who cannot fight back." Zephyrah sat down in the chair next to his bed. "I have been reading about your people's history. Even before you had space travel, humans fought wars to protect others. You call them things like peacekeeping missions and humanitarian interventions." "We have always been like this," Jake agreed. "My grandfather fought in 3 different wars on Earth, not because his country was attacked, but because other people needed help. My father was a firefighter who died running into a burning building to save strangers. It is just who we are." "It is not logical," Zephyrah said. "Evolution should favor self-preservation, not self-sacrifice." Jake smiled sadly. "Maybe human evolution was different. Maybe we survived because we learned to take care of each other, even when it cost us personally. I do not know the science behind it. I just know that when I see someone in danger, I have to help them. I cannot choose not to. Even if helping them kills you, even then." Zephyrah felt her understanding of the universe shift again. She had always thought survival was the most important instinct. But humans seemed to have developed something stronger than survival instinct, an instinct to protect others. The war. Reports say human forces have taken 70% casualties, she said. That sounds about right. But humans keep volunteering to fight. Your recruitment centers have waiting lists. Yes. Why? Your people know they will probably die. Why do they still sign up? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Because if we do not, who will? Other species are fighting too, but they fight carefully. They make sure they can win before they attack. They retreat when things get bad. They protect their own people first. That is smart. It is smart, Jake agreed. But smart does not save the maximum number of lives. Smart saves the lives that are easiest to save. Humans save the lives that need saving most, even if they are the hardest to save. Zephyra thought about the evacuation footage again. The human defensive line had been doomed from the start. Any military strategist would have called it suicide. But because of that suicide mission, millions of people were alive who would otherwise be dead. You fight for people you will never meet, she said. Yes. People from species that used to be your enemies. Yes. People who might not even thank you for saving them. Yes. I do not understand how your species survived long enough to reach the stars. Jake laughed, which surprised her. Neither do we sometimes. But here we are. As Zephyra left his room that night, she realized something that frightened her. She was starting to understand why humans fought the way they did. More than that, she was starting to think they might be right. The idea terrified her because if humans were right, then everything her own people believed about survival and logic and self-preservation might be wrong. Zephyra could not stop thinking about Jake's scars. During her breaks, she went to the medical database and pulled up his complete file. What she found made her sit back in shock. The file was thick with reports from dozens of battles and rescue missions. Each entry told the same story over and over again. Jake Martinez had volunteered for every dangerous mission, every rescue operation, every suicide run that came up. 3 years ago, he had been on Titan Colony when raiders attacked. The report said he had thrown himself on top of a family of 4 when bombs started falling. The burns on his back matched exactly with the damage described in that report. 2 years ago, he had fought hand-to-hand with Zephyrian beast warriors who were attacking a refugee transport. The claw marks on his arms were from that battle. He had killed 3 of the creatures with nothing but a broken piece of metal while shielding civilians behind him. And the surgical scars were from multiple operations where he had donated blood, bone marrow, and even part of his liver to save dying colonists during a plague outbreak. The doctors had warned him that giving so much might kill him, but he had insisted on helping until he collapsed. But these were just the official reports. Zephyra dug deeper and found unofficial accounts from other soldiers, civilians, and even former enemies. They all told the same story. Jake Martinez was the human who appeared whenever someone needed help, no matter how dangerous it was. One report from a Korthak merchant was especially interesting. The Korthak had been captured by pirates and was being tortured for information about trade routes. Jake had been part of a rescue team that was only supposed to gather intelligence. But when Jake saw what was happening to the prisoner, he had broken from his unit and attacked the pirates alone. He had been shot 5 times, but still managed to free the Korthak and carry him to safety. What made this story special was that humans and Korthak had been enemies for years. There was no reason for Jake to risk his life for someone from an enemy species, but he had done it anyway. Zephyra closed the files and walked back to Jake's room. She found him standing by the window, looking out at the stars. He was stronger now, but still moved carefully because of his healing wounds. "You should be resting," she said. "I've been sleeping for weeks," Jake replied. "I need to move around or I'll go crazy." "Tell me about the Korthak you saved," Zephyra said suddenly. Jake turned to look at her, surprise in his eyes. "You read my file?" "I read all of it," she admitted. "Every battle, every rescue, every time you nearly died saving someone else. Why did you save that Korthak? Your people were at war with his people." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "He was in pain," he finally said. "War or no war, nobody deserves to be tortured like that. But he was your enemy." "He was a person," Jake said simply. "That's all that mattered." Zephyra felt something shift in her understanding. Her people, the Valerians, were healers, but they made careful calculations about who to help and when. They considered politics, resources, and long-term consequences. But Jake seemed to operate on a much simpler principle. If someone needed help, you helped them. "Your species confuses other races," Zephyra said. "We have studied your people since you joined the galactic community. You are not the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced, but you do things that make no logical sense." "Like what?" "Like fighting in the front lines of every major battle against the Void Swarm, even though you could stay back and let other species handle it. Like volunteering for the most dangerous missions. Like sacrificing yourselves for people you've never met." Jake turned back to the window. "Someone has to do it. But why does it have to be humans? Why do you always volunteer to be the ones who die?" "Because we can't not do it," Jake said quietly. "I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. When I see someone in danger, I can't just walk away. It's not possible for me. And I think most humans feel the same way." Zephyra moved to stand beside him at the window. Outside, she could see ships coming and going from the medical station. Many of them carried wounded from the ongoing war against the Void Swarm. "I have been studying the war reports," she said. "Human casualties are much higher than any other species. But humans keep signing up to fight. Why? Because if we don't, the Void Swarm will destroy everything," Jake said. "Every world, every species, every person who has ever lived or ever will live. We can't let that happen. Other species are fighting too. Yes, but they're fighting smart. They pick battles they can win, protect their own territories first, make strategic retreats when necessary. All good tactics. And humans?" Jake smiled sadly. "We fight dumb. We charge into battles we can't win, protect everyone else's territories before our own, and never retreat if it means leaving someone behind. That is not very smart." "No," Jake agreed. "But sometimes smart isn't enough. Sometimes you need people who are too stupid to know when to quit." Zephyra thought about this. She had seen the battle reports from Kepler 442b. The human forces had been outnumbered 10-1, with no hope of victory. Any reasonable commander would have ordered a retreat. Instead, the humans had charged forward, buying precious time for evacuation ships to escape. Most of the human soldiers had died in that battle, but because of their sacrifice, 3 million civilians from various species had lived. "The evacuation ships from Kepler 442b, Zephyra said. "How many people did you save?" 3.2 million, Jake answered immediately. "Mostly families with children, some elderly who couldn't fight. a few injured soldiers from other species. And how many humans died to save them? Jake's jaw tightened. 47,000. That is not a good trade in numbers. Numbers don't matter, Jake said fiercely. Those 3 million people get to live. They get to see their families again, watch their children grow up, build new homes on safe worlds. That's worth any price. Zephyra realized she was beginning to understand something important about humans. They did not think about war the way other species did. Other races fought to win, to survive, to protect their own interests. Humans fought for an ideal that seemed almost impossible to believe, that all conscious life had value and deserved protection. "Your people will destroy themselves," she said softly. "If you keep fighting like this, there will be no humans left." "Maybe," Jake admitted, "but there will still be 3 million people alive on those evacuation ships. And millions more that other human soldiers have saved. That has to count for something." As Zephyra looked at this wounded soldier, she felt something she had never experienced before. It was not just respect or admiration. It was a kind of awe. She was looking at a member of a species that seemed willing to sacrifice everything. For others, even for people they had never met and never would meet. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The medical bay was quiet, except for the soft beeping of machines. Captain Jake Martinez lay still on the white bed, his chest rising and falling slowly. He had been sleeping for 3 weeks now. The doctors said his body needed time to heal. From the terrible battle on Kepler 442b, Nurse Zephyra walked into the room carrying a small tray of medical tools. Her blue skin sparkled like tiny crystals under the bright lights. She was tall and thin, with large silver eyes that seemed to glow softly. Her people, the Valyrians, were known across the galaxy for being the best healers. They had special powers that helped others get better faster. This was Zephyra's first time taking care of a human. She had heard stories about them, but humans were still new to space travel. Most aliens thought humans were weak and primitive. They had only been flying between stars for 50 years, while other species had been doing it for thousands. Zephyra set down her tray and looked at the sleeping man. His dark hair was messy, and his face was covered with small cuts that were almost healed. But it was his body that made her stop and stare. Even through the thin hospital gown, she could see the marks of many battles. She picked up her scanner and began checking his vital signs. Everything looked good. His heart was strong, his breathing was normal, and his brain activity showed he would wake up soon. But as she moved the scanner over his body, she saw something that made her curious. The scars on his skin were not random. They formed patterns that told a story. There were burn marks on his back that looked like he had been covering someone else. Claw marks on his arms showed he had fought wild beasts with his bare hands. And there were surgical scars that looked like he had given parts of his own body to save others. Zephyra had seen many wounded soldiers from different species. Usually their scars showed they had been fighting to win battles or protect themselves. But this human's scars were different. They showed he had been fighting to protect others, even when it meant getting hurt himself. She placed her hand gently on his forehead. Her healing touch was warm and soothing. Through her empathic abilities, she could feel the pain he carried inside. It was not just physical pain from his wounds. There was emotional pain, too, deep and heavy, like he was carrying the weight of many lost lives. Jake's eyes suddenly opened. They were brown and tired, but alert. He looked around the room quickly, like a soldier checking for danger. Before, his gaze settled on Zephyra. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice rough from not speaking for weeks. "You are safe," Zephyra said softly. "You are on Haven's Rest, a medical station. I am Nurse Zephyra. You have been sleeping for 3 weeks." Jake tried to sit up, but pain shot through his body. Zephyra gently pushed him back down. "You must rest," she said. "Your body is still healing from very serious injuries." "My squad," Jake said urgently. "Are they okay? Did the evacuation ships get away?" Zephyra was surprised. Most wounded soldiers asked about themselves first. They wanted to know how badly they were hurt or when they could go home. But this human's first concern was for others. "The evacuation was successful," she told him. "Many lives were saved because of what you and your squad did." Jake closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Some of the tension left his body. "Good," he whispered. "That's good." Over the next few days, Zephyra spent more time in Jake's room than any of her other patients. She told herself it was because humans healed differently than other species, and she needed to study how his body was recovering. But the truth was, she was fascinated by him. Jake was polite, but quiet. He never complained about pain, even when she knew the treatments hurt. He ate whatever food she brought him without complaining. And he always asked about other patients, wanting to know if there was anything he could do to help, even though he could barely get out of bed. "Why did you become a soldier?" Zephyra asked one day as she changed his bandages. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Someone has to," he finally said. "The Void Swarm won't stop on their own. If we don't fight them, they'll destroy everything." "But why you?" she pressed. "Your people are new to space. You could have stayed on your home worlds where it was safe." Jake looked out the window at the stars. "Because out there, people are dying. People who have families, dreams, lives worth living. If I can help save even one of them, then it's worth it." Zephyra didn't understand. Her people helped others because it was logical and efficient. They had treaties and agreements that required mutual aid. But Jake spoke like saving others was not a choice but a need, something built into his very nature. "Tell me about the battle," she said gently. Jake's jaw tightened. "We were holding the line while civilian ships evacuated. There were families from 6 different species trying to get away before the Void Swarm arrived. Our job was to buy them time. And you succeeded?" "Most of them got away," Jake said quietly. "But not all. Never all." Zephyra saw the pain in his eyes and felt it through her empathic connection. This human carried the weight of every life he couldn't save, even though he had saved hundreds. As the days passed, Jake grew stronger. He could sit up now and even walk short distances. But Zephyra noticed he never seemed happy about getting better. Instead, he seemed eager to return to the war, to go back to fighting and protecting others. She began to understand that this was not just one unusual human. From the reports she read and the stories she heard, all humans seemed to share this strange need to protect others even at great cost to themselves. It was something that both amazed and worried her.